Welcome to the Knowledge Based Ninjas podcast, where Gauri Ramkumar of Document 360 finds the best SaaS self-service knowledge bases in the world and then interviews their creators. Let's get started with today's episode.
Good day, everyone. Our guest today is Aditi Khanchandani, Senior Technical Writer, Corporate Security at Cognizant. Welcome, Aditi, to the Knowledge Based Ninjas podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Gauri. Thank you so much for having me on this podcast.
Fantastic. So I know it's slightly late for you today, almost into your evening family time. Thank you for spending time with me today. So let's just get started, Aditi. How did everything start with regard to you getting into technical writer role? How did you initially got into documentation? Please help us understand a little bit more about you.
Right. So I initially, my first job was with the financial services firm. I started, I was working in research. So I was researching financial and investment professionals. And that particular role involved a little bit of writing, profiles about investment firms and, the professionals working there. But later on, I got into proper technical editing and writing. And I worked with a couple of IT and financial services firms and involved in documentation. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. So do you know how long you've been in this documentation field?
I've been in technical writing and editing about over 10 years.
Fantastic. So brilliant. So over this 10 years of time, what is your documentation process? You can just relate it to your current role. And what teams do you typically get involved in defining such documentation processes, Aditi?
In my current role, I work with the cybersecurity data analytics team, and they perform a lot of data analysis and create data visualizations. So I create a lot of internal documentation related to their processes, and apart from that, I also edit procedural documentation, corporate security related procedural documentation such as standards, policies, etc. Yeah.
Fantastic. And what role does technology play in defining such documentation processes, Aditi?
Yeah. So generally, a lot of the documentation that I create, I use FrameMaker. Apart from that, regular Word, and then Adobe Acrobat. Apart from that, I create a lot of flow charts and diagrams. So I use a lot of Visio, and since I work with data analysts, they use Stabilo. So that is also not exactly part of the documentation, but yeah, part of my current role.
Fantastic.
So that's the kind. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. So in this so many years of experience, according to you, what do you think are the important factors one should consider when it comes to creating documentation?
Yeah, first and foremost, you always need to consider your target audience and what you're addressing in terms of the documentation, how it meets their needs. And apart from that, quality is one aspect. Documentation should ideally be error-free. So yeah, those are two things that I think is very important. And apart from that, documentation should be readable and basically meet the needs of the target audience.
Super. So how important do you think quality documentation is for any successful company or the team?
Yeah. So documentation is a pretty important part, and it's like a link between, say, a product or service and the end customer. And if you're able to meet the needs of the customer or address any issues that the customer has through the documentation, then I feel you've covered that aspect.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Great. So have you seen any kind of reduction in your workload since introducing a quality documentation? It could be either in the current role, or if you remember anything that helped you to improvise in your previous roles. You can just cite any examples if you would like to.
I wouldn't say there's been like a reduction in workload. In fact, there's there's like always more demand for documentation in terms of, because a lot of times, say whether your customers are internal within your team or it's external customers, there's always like new features, or like say if it's something like a standards, policies, or procedures, there's always updates. So I wouldn't say there's a reduction in workload as such.
Mm-hmm. Right. So are there any points you would like to cover before we move on to the rapid fire round, Aditi?
No, that's fine. You can.
All right. Super. So let me take you back 10 years behind, where you just started with your documentation career. So who have you learned the most about documentation from in your career?
I wouldn't be able to pinpoint like one person, but throughout my career, it's been my colleagues and maybe even supervisors that I worked with. I've learned a lot of new technology tools, mostly from my workmates, and sometimes obviously of different resources that are available on the internet and stuff. But I wouldn't be able to pinpoint like one person that I've learned from.
Fantastic. So you try to grab the positives from different people you meet in your day-to-day activities.
Correct.
Great. So you just mentioned that you refer to websites when it comes to resources. So would you be able to share a couple of documentation related resources you have consumed recently?
Yeah, so I go to quite a few resources, not particularly one resource, but I go to the STC site or write the docs. And apart from that, there are a few groups on LinkedIn that I go to, and I see a lot of posts written by other writers. I try to gain whatever I can from that. And of course, Google is our best friend. So I search up a lot of stuff through Google. And yeah.
Fantastic. Do you write any blogs or any community related activities? Do you do any community related activities?
No, not that. I'm not really. I haven't created any blog posts as of now, but yeah, in the future I might.
Great. I wish you all the best. There's lots of things out there. You can start exploring. Fantastic. Great. So let me ask this question. What is that one piece of documentation related advice you would give to your old 20-year-old self?
Thinking back, I would definitely say that don't ever stop learning. There's always something new to learn every day. And always be willing to work out of your comfort zone, willing to wear a number of hats, take on things that you normally wouldn't do. Like say if you're a writer, you could become service desk admin, or do something that just normally you're not used to do, and that would finally maybe in the long run help you in your career, or maybe you never know that it's like find out something that you like to do ultimately. Yeah.
Fantastic. So every day is a new beginning, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm. Super. So that's a good advice for our youngsters to grab onto. So anything else to our audience before we close this podcast?
Not that I can think of, but I've been quite excited to be part of this podcast, and I've been hearing quite a few of the other ones that you posted, and it's exciting to learn, and interesting to learn a lot of things from different writers or people that are part of this documentation community. So thank you so much for setting this up.
Fantastic. So our knowledge base Ninjas podcast is also one form of documentation resource then to you.
Yes, it is.
Fantastic. So thank you, Aditi, once again for sharing your experience, and especially touch basing on the importance of good quality documentation. It's a great experience talking to you in the last few minutes, and have a good day and stay safe.
You too. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Knowledge Based Ninjas podcast. Please head to iTunes, rate, and provide honest feedback on the podcast. See you next week.